I am simply getting the facts out there for the public to consume, for the media to consume, and then for them to articulate something completely different than has been said about me for the last 2 years. And based on that, my lawyers believe, as they are the ones who formally submitted the application, that there's a basis for a pardon.
Do you believe you deserve a pardon?
As you just heard, the legal team for former Trump advisor George Papadopoulos is asking for a pardon. Papadopoulos served 12 days in jail after pleading guilty to charges related to the Russia investigation. Well, now he's considering withdrawing that plea.
In his new book, Deep State Target, How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump, Papadopoulos claims he did not lie to the FBI and that the special counsel pressured him into that plea. George Papadopoulos is joining us now to share his story and to discuss his book. Thanks for being on Rising.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you today. All right, there's a lot to go through. Why don't we give you a chance to tell us why did you write this book and what is it that you want people to get from it?
Sure. The reason I wrote my book, Deep State Target, is because for the last 2 years, even maybe 3 years, there has been so much misunderstanding and disinformation propagated to the American public about who George Papadopoulos was, and what his role was in the Trump campaign, the Trump transition team, and his role within the Mueller investigation. I would say that almost all the information surrounding me and my situation that was disseminated throughout the world by various news outlets is almost all wrong. And that's why for the last 6 months I focused quite exclusively on writing this book and getting it out there. And I think it's shocking a lot of people who have actually read it.
So, George, let me ask you this. So I remember, and you may not remember this, you briefly worked on the Carson campaign. I remember you. And then you moved on to the Trump campaign, and there was obviously a big difference. I mean, it was like night and day. Do you regret working on the Trump campaign? Because ultimately, it is that position that led you to serving 12 days in prison.
You know what? I wouldn't change a thing. I think the 2016 election was a historic moment. It was a monumental event in, I think, global history. And it obviously changed modern political history in the United States and certainly around the world. I think the Trump presidency, you'll see the effects of it in trade, security, basically social issues. So if I contributed...
So you don't regret how this has tarnished your reputation, how it may have harmed your loved ones, family, friends? You don't regret any of that?
I can't say that I regret it because, you know, like I said in the beginning of this, so much of the information about me was fake. And now that I'm allowed to actually speak for the first time using my own words, and I wrote a book that allows the readers to understand how I got from A to Z and how the world got from A to Z, you know, I can't say that I regret it because fortunately, you know, it was basically a manufactured investigation that I think my book will act as a roadmap to lead another investigation into those who committed actually treasonous acts against American citizens and the president himself.
By the way, you know, treason is punishable by death.
Well, you know, I think a lot of...
Is that what you're calling for?
We're talking about reputations of people, and I have to say the leadership under the former administration, the Jim Comeys and the Sally Yates and the Bruce Orrs, their reputations aren't looking so good anymore, and some have been fired, demoted, and they're currently under investigation themselves. So, and now there's obviously the call from the president and his allies in Congress to open up new investigations, and I think a lot of information in my book.
That's pretty rich. So here's my question for you is, let's settle something. You say you've been misrepresented.
Yes.
Donald Trump, when you were in the campaign, listed you as one of his senior foreign policy advisors, top foreign policy advisors. When you got caught up with the FBI, they then called you a coffee boy. Which was it? Were you a senior advisor or a coffee boy?
Well, as you'll see in my book, I don't know if a coffee boy introduces a candidate for presidency to the president of Egypt. I don't know, like I did, I don't know if a coffee boy is one of the co-authors of his first foreign policy speech he gave at the Mayflower Hotel. And I'm not sure a coffee boy also works on the transition team advising senior level members like Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, and K.T. McFarland, as I was on various energy issues and Mediterranean security issues like I was. And that's unfortunately part of why I'm getting my story out there, because people like Michael Caputo, who's a nice guy, but he's the one who calls me a coffee boy, yet he was fired within joining the campaign after 1 month.
Okay, so if you were a senior advisor, then Alex Downer, the Australian diplomat who met you in London at the wine bar, when he referred to you, when he referred to his Australian friends and then ultimately to the U.S. intelligence agencies that you said to him there's going to be, the Russians have information on Hillary Clinton right before that emails came out. He was right to report that to those intelligence agencies because you were a Trump senior advisor who was telling him something that was pretty important that was about to happen.
It's a very good point you're making right now about Alexander Downer, and I want to make sure that the viewers understand that I actually reported this man to the FBI and Bob Mueller because of his bizarre behavior at my meeting. So keep that in.
You reported that to them in when you met him in London?
I reported it during my discussions with the FBI.
So after the FBI already came to you?
Yes, yes. And I just want to make a point clear. I was one of 4 witnesses invited to testify in front of the House Oversight Committee about 3 months ago, along with the names Sally Yates, Loretta Lynch, and Jim Comey, to discuss FISA abuse. Now, my congressional testimony is now released. It's public. It's all 236 pages of it can be read. And during this interview, from anyone who wants to read it, you can understand by the questions I'm being asked about Alexander Downer and how I'm responding and how congressmen are receiving that information. Alexander Downer was not simply some sort of friendly diplomat passing along this information that I don't ever remember talking about, but he was actually—
You saying he made it up?
I believe not only did he make it up, but he was actually sent to meet me and trap me and try to sabotage the Trump campaign. And my congressional testimony backs up that assertion.
So George, look, you were let go on the Carson campaign. According to Trump officials, when this news broke, you were let go. The president said he did not know who you were, to be quite honest. To a lot of people, it may seem like you have inflated your role on the Trump campaign, and here you are with this book. Why should people trust anything that's in this book when you were convicted of lying?
We have to look at isolated events versus the greater trajectory from A to Z. I was convicted of lying about when I met an individual 11 months before the FBI came to my home. That doesn't negate the facts and the emails and the corroborating evidence I have that substantiates my claims of what I was doing on the Trump campaign. So the
president's lying?
I can't say that the president is lying. He was probably misinformed. And quite frankly, look, if I had a former associate who was described to the media falsely, and the special counsel described my case in such a sensationalized way that was outright a lie once we found out new evidence about my case. For example, that George Papadopoulos was meeting with the niece of Vladimir Putin. He was discussing hacked emails with a Russia-linked professor. And these types of, this innuendo and this very bizarre way that the special counsel wrote it, if I was a president, I would distance myself too. But now that we have—
But the president didn't even acknowledge that he knew you, George. You said you wrote his first major foreign policy speech. How do you not know the person who wrote your first major forein policy speach? I mean, it just seems to be inconsistent.
George, but you think Donald Trump is really involved in the speech process?
But my point, Jamal, here's my point. People are going to watch this, and they're going to listen to what George is saying, and they're going to say, well, I remember what the president said about George. If this guy plays such a critical role with this president, why didn't the president remember him? Why didn't the president even acknowledge that, hey, this guy misbehaved, I don't like what he did, but yes, he did play a pivotal role in my— He didn't even go that far.
That's fair.
I can't read the president's mind, and also he mentioned that his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, was a short-term volunteer and barely was involved with the White House, and Paul Manafort was a guy that barely worked for him. So, look, it's his personality. That's his own way of doing his business, and I have no issue with that. The facts are the facts. I back up everything in my book with facts, and that's all I can do. How they respond to me, what they believe, or what their impression was of me, that's irrelevant to what my book is about, what I contributed, and there's nothing I could do of how somebody perceives me. That's, I guess.
Just for the record, one of the reasons we brought up Alexander Downer in that conversation is because all reports lead to that is the beginning of the FBI's investigation into Donald Trump. Lots of people want to say it's the dossier, but it appears that your conversation with him in London is what actually sparked the interest in the Trump-Russia relationship.
Well, let's look at the facts too, because this is all about the facts now. This isn't about 2 years of misreporting facts. Stefan Halper, who was a CIA FBI asset who made contact with me in September of 2016, was already making contact with other members of the Trump campaign in early July of 2016. an FBI source cannot make contact with American citizens unless there's an active investigation already into a campaign. So already that one event suggests that the July 31st date is artificial. Number two, Carter Page was already interviewed by the FBI in March of 2016. So the FBI was already looking into this campaign. And third, Devin Nunes himself, I think 3 days ago, suggested publicly that the FBI had already launched a counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign by late 2015, early 2016. So where this July 31st date came about, I have no idea. In my quite honest opinion, I believe that's some sort of cover story that just doesn't add up when it's subject to scrutiny and the facts.
Can we do one more thing before we go? The pardons.
Sure.
You said, we just saw the clip of you on CNN talking about the pardon. I think you told Ari Melber on MSNBC that if you got a pardon, it wouldn't change your life one way or the other. Being a convicted felon, you don't think having a pardon would change your life, not having to acknowledge the fact that you've been convicted?
You know what? Actually, I don't want to speak for my lawyers, because my lawyers are obviously handling this, and it's a legal issue. They're looking out for my legal interests, and they believe that there are justifiable reasons for why I should receive a pardon. There are legal reasons for why I should receive a pardon. And there was also discussions that were potentially withdrawing the guilty plea itself without even having to get a pardon. So that's probably more of a discussion for my legal team.
No, but I'm talking about your life. I mean, every job application you fill out, every time you have to do, you can't get national security clearance. Everything you do is you're going to have to say that you've been convicted of a felony. You don't think a pardon will change that?
I cannot convince or not convince the president to pardon me or anyone in this country. The president is going to make a decision. I don't have an expectation for a pardon. So if he does it, I've made it clear that I would honorably accept a pardon from him.
So do you think you deserve the pardon?
I believe that when the facts are out there, that there's certainly the basis for why my lawyers believe that I deserve a pardon.
But what do you believe, George? Not your lawyers.
I believe that there was a tremendous injustice done in my case in this entire saga. I believe the basis for this investigation was corrupted from the start. And I think once all those facts are out, and now that the president has determined that it's the time to start declassifying certain FISA documents, I believe the truth is going to get out there. It's going to terrify Americans of what the previous administration and the FBI was doing to American citizens such as myself, and then we'll see what happens.
You also said somewhere you thought that Donald Trump might read your book.
You know what?
You really think Donald Trump's going to read your book?
You know what? I don't know.
Does he read books?
I don't know. I guess he doesn't know me, so I don't know. But hopefully he does. I think it's a really interesting read, and I should open up a little more discourse into some of the things that went down in 2016.
Well, you've got a right to tell your story, and it looks like you did it in a pretty compelling way. This is the book Deep State Target by George Papadopoulos. We'll do a little book hawking here for you.
Thanks so much.
This was a pleasure, George.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. It was a great conversation.
Right, thanks for being here. Coming up on Rising, Buck has been at the southern border for the last few days.
He shares his first dispatch with us when Rising returns.